to our show that is called Real Shame. It's a show where we watch movies from our movie list of shame or movie blind spots. This week we're watching a couple movies that I've never seen, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because there's a lot that I haven't seen. And what movie are we watching? Or if you've seen the title, you know what we're talking about. But what movie are we watching today?
Who's the black private dick that's a sex machine to all the chicks? He's hotter than Bond, cooler than Bullitt. He's John Shaft.
Can you dig it?
Can you dig it? So Shaft was directed by Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks was a Renaissance man. This guy did it all. He was a painter. He was a musician. He was a photographer for a long time. He did work for Life magazine. He was involved with Essence magazine when that started. And at the beginning of Shaft, when Shaft stops by the news vendor's little stand, there's an Essence magazine prominently displayed there. Gordon Parks was also a novelist. He wrote books like The Learning Tree, which he also adapted into a film, and which was just added to the Criterion Collection as of, I think, December of last year. It was put out on Blu-ray. And Gordon Parks actually has a cameo in Shaft. When Shaft is going around looking for Ben Buford, he stops at an old apartment that Ben stayed at, and the landlord is played by Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks says, "I haven't seen him, but he owes me 6 months' rent." The screenplay was written by John D.F. Black and journalist Ernest Tidyman. He was a journalist who became a novelist as well. He wrote 7 Shaft novels total.
Oh, so was it a novel before?
Yes, yeah. So this first movie was apparently based on the first Shaft novel, the 1970 novel. I've never read any of the Shaft novels, so I have no idea how closely it follows it, if at all. Ernest Tidyman worked on this screenplay in 1971. He also worked on another screenplay for a big hit that came out in 1971 called The French Connection.
Oh.
The movie, it has an iconic music score by Mr. Isaac Hayes. I don't think anybody doesn't know who Isaac Hayes is, if nothing else as Chef from South Park,
before he decided it went against his beliefs. Yeah,
so Shaft was shot entirely in New York City. Apparently MGM Studios, which is the studio that made Shaft, they wanted to shoot it in L.A. originally. And Gordon Parks said, N-O spells no, dudes. And so they shot it entirely in New York City. It stars Richard Roundtree in, apparently, I wasn't even aware of this, even though I've seen this movie several times. This is his film debut. I did not realize this. So we saw Richard Roundtree like 2 years ago in Earthquake. He plays Miles. He's like the Evel Knievel daredevil guy. And I'm pretty sure that Victoria Principal stole his Shaft wardrobe in that movie because she walks around dressed in like black leather outfit the pretty much the entire movie. But anyway, Richard Roundtree plays the titular John Shaft, and something that I also didn't know about Richard Roundtree when I was doing some research for this episode, he is a breast cancer survivor.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, obviously male breast cancer is a lot rarer, but he was diagnosed with breast cancer back in the early 90s, had some treatment, been cancer-free ever since, so that's awesome. But yeah, I had no idea. And I think he kind of kept that under wraps for a long time, and then he finally spoke out about it. But I thought that was very interesting. Christopher St. John plays Ben Buford. Moses Gunn plays the basically Harlem crime boss Bumpy Jonas, and Bumpy Jonas was based on a real-life Harlem crime boss named Bumpy Johnson. And Bumpy Johnson's was a mentor to Frank Lucas, which is the character that Denzel Washington plays in the Ridley Scott movie American Gangster. Charles Shalfie plays Vic Andrazi, Lieutenant Vic Andrazi. Drew Bundini Brown plays Bumpy's right-hand man, Willie. And in real life, Drew Bundini Brown was a right-hand man to Muhammad Ali. He was a corner man and a trainer. And an interesting thing about Drew Bundini Brown, because there have been so many like Muhammad Ali biopics and stuff like that, Drew Bundini Brown has been portrayed on screen by both Bernie Mac and Jamie Foxx. So that's pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah. And finally, the last person I want to mention from the cast is a guy named Antonio Fargas. He's barely in the movie, but I mention him because he's still acting today. He's been in tons and tons of things. He plays Bunky in this film, but he played Huggy Bear in the Starsky and Hutch TV show. If you've watched that, again, he's in a lot of things, but he's definitely well known for playing Huggy Bear in Starsky and Hutch. And he's in the blaxploitation parody I'm Gonna Get You Sucker as Fly Guy.
Okay.
He is the guy that's wearing the hopelessly outdated kind of pimp outfit with the platform shoes that have goldfish in them. Love that character. That's Antonio Fargas. He's barely in this film. He's maybe in it for like a minute, but he's also in kind of the part where Shaft is going around looking for Ben Buford. Shaft has to give him a $20 bill, and he's like, "Oh, that Ben Buford."
I
know who
remember
you're
that,
talking
when he
about.
sees the guy on the street.
Yeah, that's Antonio Fargas.
Okay.
So Shaft, along with Sweet Sweetback's badass song, directed by Melvin Van Peebles, are considered kind of the first two blaxploitation films. What is a blaxploitation film? Well, first you have to understand what an exploitation film is. An exploitation film is a film that exploits and magnifies its subject matter, and a lot of times the subject matter is kind of lurid, like violence or gratuitous sex or something like that. It doesn't have to be, but a lot of times it is. But an exploitation film can also be just an emphasis on a particular race of people, a nationality of people, your title or your profession. There's a lot of different kinds of exploitation films, and exploitation films were not new to the 1970s. Blaxploitation, that genre film was kind of coined at that time, but exploitation films had been around basically since the beginning of cinema. Okay. So you can go back and look at movies like Reefer Madness or Sex Madness. In fact, Kino Lorber has put out, I think, Reefer Madness and Sex Madness, as well as a lot of other kind of exploitation films. They originally, they're known as propaganda films because they're intended to illustrate the dangers of smoking marijuana, but they end up almost kind of glorifying it, or at the very least, making it very hilarious.
It's like Dare.
It's ridiculous.
It's like High School and Dare.
Dare?
Did you have Dare in high school?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, drug awareness, whatever.
Yeah,
and it basically made you know more things about drugs than you would have if it wasn't around.
It shined a spotlight on drugs.
It's like they have like a packet. They're like, these are the drugs, and this is
now I know what to get.
And this is the nicknames of the drugs. So you're like, okay, well,
I know the slang.
Yeah, now I know the slang.
So exploitation films again had been around, again since the early days of cinema, but the late 1960s, definitely throughout the 70s and even into the 80s was, I don't know if I'd say heyday, but definitely there's a ton of exploitation films from that era. I mean, there's exploitation films nowadays. It's not like they went away or anything like that. But a lot of times when people are talking about exploitation films, they mean specifically kind of 60s through 70s into the 80s, that kind of era. But blaxploitation is a portmanteau of the words black and exploitation. Drop the CK from one word, drop the E from the second word, stick them together, and you have blaxploitation. That was a term coined by a guy named Dr. Junius Griffin. He was the head of the LA chapter of the NAACP, and he coined it as a pejorative term. Like, it was not a good thing. He did not like it. He didn't like the depiction of African Americans on screen. Yeah. And he coined blaxploitation, but the name stuck, and it's become kind of, a genre unto itself. But blaxploitation, and I stole this definition from dictionary.com, is a subgenre of American cinema in the 1970s featuring black protagonists in exploitation films intended to appeal to African American audiences. They said it a lot better than I could have said it, so that's why I stole it from dictionary.com. But some other examples other than blaxploitation of exploitation films are sexploitation, nunsploitation, so like nuns.
Bernadette.
Bernadette. Oh, like the
new one from not Gore Verbinski.
Oh yeah, the Paul Verhoeven.
Yeah. Right?
Exactly. That probably fits under
Vendetta, I think is what actually.
It fits under nunsploitation.
Yeah, there you go.
Severin Films actually just came out with a Nasty Habits box set, which has a bunch of nunsploitation films. Cannibal films from the late 1970s or early 1980s. Slasher films, which obviously are still around today. Women in prison films. Biker films. The list goes on and on, but those are some other types of exploitation films.
Is Alive a cannibal exploitation film?
I don't know if that fits, but yes, it does have some cannibalism in it. Spoiler, no.
I've never seen it.
Well, yeah, they did have to eat some of the dead passengers to
I
survive.
shouldn't laugh. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll have to watch that at some point. But so as I mentioned, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song actually came out, I think, in April of 1971. So Shaft came out in July of 1971. Those are kind of the 1-2 punch earliest examples of blaxploitation film. There's some debate about that. There's some people that say no, there were some blaxploitation films before that. One that I heard mentioned is Cotton Comes to Harlem, which came out in 1970, which I've seen and is a great film. I don't consider that a blaxploitation film, but I could see how some people do consider it. Either way, I think the general kind of accepted by most people, not definition, but the first two movies are Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song and this movie that we're talking about today, Shaft. So after all that intro, this is a movie that I have seen on. I saw it in the theater. I saw it on a release that the Paramount Theater did in Austin. I've had it on VHS. I've owned it. I've owned it on DVD. I've owned it on Blu-ray. I've seen it many, many times. That obviously probably gives you an indication of how I feel about this film. But I know you've never seen it. Have you ever seen the 2000 version with Samuel L. Jackson?
No, I haven't seen that. And then also, didn't you do another one where they united all the Shafts? It was like the
in
it was
2019.
like the Spider-Man Far From Home, but with
it was grandfather Shaft, son Shaft, and grandson Shaft.
But
I haven't seen that either.
We need like a multiverse Shaft.
We probably do. I would watch it.
Oh, dude, that'd be so cool.
I would watch it.
Like,
I'd be all down for that.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool.
Okay, so you didn't know, or you haven't seen the Shaft 2000 film.
No, I've seen the trailer, but I haven't seen
didn't really know much about this film going into it.
No, I mean, I knew kind of the gist of this is like a blaxploitation movie, and it was like the start of it, and then obviously, like you said, I think anyone in popular culture probably has heard the Shaft theme song,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
I mean, Beavis and Butthead Do America. I mean, they copy that the vibe of it, stuff
right.
like that,
yeah,
for their stuff. So I mean, it just feel like that's kind of permeated the popular culture and stuff like that.
Totally.
So I kind of went into this blind, like I didn't know. I mean, I think Shaft is like, you know, James Bond and like those characters where you kind of know who they are, like, you know, you get a general sense of who they are, right? So, you know, he's like a no nonsense man. He's like a private eye. You know, he's a
sex machine.
All the chicks. All that stuff. So,
right.
So I kind of knew a little bit like what to kind of expect Shaft, or what a little bit about his character kind of going into it, like you would. I think James Bond's a good like kind of allegory to that. So what did I think of Shaft? I mean, I don't think the story was that interesting to me. It seemed like it played out fairly straightforward. Like there wasn't a big, like I thought it was going to center around the mystery of trying to find the daughter. But you know, really he kind of finds them pretty quick and finds out who's taking it and finds out kind of this deeper, you know, tie to the mob. And, you know, and we've done a lot of stuff where we've done kind of the, you know, like the kind of noir kind of stuff where, you know, usually that's like a step and then it's like a big deep pull and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And this movie's not interested. It doesn't do any stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's not really convoluted.
So I kind of wish there was so that all being said, I wish there was a little bit more meat to the story and to the mystery and stuff like that. I wish there was a little bit more to kind of sink your teeth into and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of left me a little cold. I do like, however, the look at, you know, New York in the 70s and all this stuff. Like I like that, you know, and it feels very like I will say the outside stuff they overdubbed. It sounds like a lot. Like they couldn't record audio like when it was happening, and they kind of went back and ADR'd it. So it looks like it's really capturing almost documentary style, like what New York was like, what the people are like, and stuff like that. And I really like that. You know, that verisimilitude, which I've used occasionally here, feels very real. Feels like it's a very accurate look of what life was like in New York, what life was like for Black people in New York, and stuff like that. And of course, some of it's probably elevated and all that stuff with all the, you know, the gang and the mafia and all that kind of stuff. But like, if you peel back past that, I feel like you get a accurate look at that time for, you know, the people that are, you know, living in New York and stuff like that. So that aspect I really liked and really enjoyed the movie. I just wish there was a little bit more meat to the bones. And I'm wondering if like later Shaft movies, if they kind of get the story part kind of figured out a little bit better. because I think it's a great introduction to the character. I just wish there was a little bit more, story to it. Does any of that make sense at all?
It does. It makes sense. And I think I like this film a lot more because I agree with some of what you said, and I think that this film, I kind of grew up with this film. I saw it a long time ago, and I've seen it many times since then. So I forgive a lot. I think of what is on screen, but I do agree also with you. Again, and I mentioned earlier that apparently the studio wanted to shoot in L.A. and Gordon Parks was like, no, let's shoot in New York, and I think that's really cool to see him kind of walking around the streets and seeing. I enjoyed seeing like the movie marquees. So you see like Patton is showing,
I love
MASH,
movie
which both came out in
marquees,
1970.
like the signage, like the ads and all that kind of stuff. I love seeing all that kind of stuff, and the different shops. Like Times Square in the 70s is far different than Times Square here in the 2020s and all that kind of stuff. So I like I said, I feel like you get a really good time capsule look at that stuff. So I'm like you, love looking at the background and kind of capturing all those different pieces and all those different elements.
Yeah, a lot of these movies in the 1970s that shot in New York as well as in Los Angeles and other big cities, and you get to see what it looked like back in the 1970s because obviously we weren't there, we weren't alive, and but seeing those kinds of things, it's like a travelogue or something like that. This movie, I do think it, especially watching it now, because I've seen it a lot, but I haven't seen it in a number of years now. And I think watching it now, I definitely think it's pretty slow to begin with. When Bumpy...
Wait till Wednesday.
Well, first of all, when initially he finds out that, basically in the opening credits, he talks to the newsstand guy, and he finds out that there's two guys that are looking for him, and then he gets like a shoe shine and stuff. He's asking that guy about it, and then he goes up to his office, and he has a fight with the two guys. One of them goes out the window, and they were sent by Bumpy. Yeah. Bumpy wants to find out where somebody kidnapped Bumpy's daughter. Who's kidnapped his daughter? He sent those two guys to find out. One of them gets killed. Shaft gets taken down to the police station. Then he meets with Bumpy and his right-hand man, Willie, played by Drew Bundini Brown. Then he goes to find Ben Buford. I think once he hooks up with Ben Buford, the movie starts to pick up pace a lot more. And I think once it gets to that point, it becomes a lot more interesting. I agree. I mean, the movie itself is not super complex or super convoluted. Yeah. I think that's okay. And you were asking about, do some of the later films, are they more exciting or are they a little more complex? I think Shaft's Big Score is probably better than Shaft's. That may be blasphemy to say. Yeah. But Shaft's Big Score to me is a way more exciting. And the climax and the ending of Shaft's Big Score has a cool car chase, being chased by another car, being chased by a helicopter. Yeah. And like he's running, he's got like this shotgun thing that he's like shooting the helicopter and everything. It's cool. way more exciting. So I think Shaft's Big Score is probably going to be more up your alley.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want like bombastic like Michael Bay kind of action, but I do wish there was more to it. And thinking about it, you do find out that there is more kind of brooding under the surface with the mafia and what's going on with Bumpy and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, but I just wish like it was a little bit less straightforward in the story, or there was like a little bit more twists and turns than there. That's probably what I want. I wish there was a little bit more twists and turns, a little bit more mystery to the kidnapping than it really was. And maybe that was me going into it, and they're like, we need to figure out who kidnapped my daughter. I'm like, oh, cool, this is going to be like a mystery, and he's going to try to solve it. But then it's kind of like, no, we solved that in like 5 minutes or whatever,
Yeah, I think this first movie, more than anything, it's an introduction to the character. And it's almost more about his character than it is about, I mean, I'm not to say that the story isn't interesting at all, but it definitely is, like as you said, it's not much of a mystery. What he does find out that the mob has Bumpy's daughter, and then he just has to figure out how do we get to her, and that's when he hooks up with Ben Buford and Ben Buford's guys and all that kind of stuff. So, but I think, the movie is more about just seeing this cool character on screen. And, instead of a white protagonist, now we've got a black protagonist who doesn't take any shit, right? And, and the way that he interacts with like the white police officers, the way that he interacts with Ben Buford and his gangs, the way that he interacts with Bumpy and, the crime bosses and all that kind of stuff. I think it's more about kind of his character. I think that to me makes the movie kind of enjoyable on its own terms, as opposed to the story. But I do think after this first movie, the second movie is just, because they've already established the character. The second movie, the character. He's still sleeping around. He's still a sex machine to all the chicks and all that kind of stuff, and he's still a cool dude. But the second movie to me is just way more exciting. And even the third movie, because the third movie, Shaft in Africa, he goes to Africa, so it's more kind of globe-trotting kind of thing,
cool.
or something like that. So yeah, the second and the third movie have more movement, I guess, and I think this first movie is more about his character, and the story is a little bit, not as cool, maybe. Doesn't have that factor. But I like this movie a lot. Again, I've seen it starting at a young age, so I feel like I kind of grew up with this movie and think it's really cool. But I enjoy it for that. But yeah, I wanted to pick it because I knew you'd never seen it, and because this week, like you said, we're doing a couple of early examples of blaxploitation movies. Not Sweetback's Badass Song, but we're doing another one that followed this movie. But so was that everything?
Yeah, that's really it. I mean, I wish I liked it more, or maybe.
Well, you might like Shaft's Big Score.
Yeah,
Shaft's Big Score if you check that out. So exploitation films, as I mentioned, were really, really prevalent in the 1970s. It's the kind of thing that you could go to the Fancy Pants Theater and watch MASH or something like that, or you could go to the drive-in and watch like a double or triple feature for probably the same price that you would watch, at the Fancy Pants Theater, and take your date and eat some hot dogs and nachos and stuff like that. You might see like a gangster film followed by a biker film followed by a werewolf film or something. So you had all this kind of variety. Or you might see a biker film that had werewolves, like Werewolves on Wheels, which is an actual film.
Sounds amazing.
Exploitation film from the early 1970s.
I want to see that.
Yeah, well, it was put out on Blu-ray, I think, pretty recently by, I think, Kino Lorber, because they put out everything.
Werewolves on Wheels, that's amazing.
If I'm not mistaken. So we mentioned the iconic music score by Isaac Hayes. It was nominated for Best Original Score at the Academy Awards. It did not win. But the theme from Shaft, which everybody knows, did win the Best Original Song at the Academy Awards, and he became the first black composer to win an Oscar. Isaac Hayes did.
It's crazy. That's awesome.
The song itself, the theme from Shaft, was listed at number 38, or is listed as number 38 on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Songs. And then obviously, when we're going to talk about this more on Wednesday, but blaxploitation films have been a major influence on hip-hop culture, on hip-hop music, and they've influenced a lot of filmmakers, including, of course, Quentin Tarantino, because he watched a lot of blaxploitation films. He watched a lot of exploitation films in general when he was growing up and when he was working at, I think, Video Archives in the 1980s. And a lot of characters will mention blaxploitation movies or characters like Get Christy Love and stuff like that I know they mentioned in Reservoir Dogs. So huge influence on him. As we've been mentioning throughout the show, Shaft, the original Shaft, was followed by 2 sequels. And I've got the vinyl records here. I know Shaft, the first vinyl record, Shaft's Big Score, is the second film.
And you got that explosion we're talking about.
That's right. He's on a boat. He's in a car. He's got the helicopter.
Great.
And then the third movie in the original Shaft trilogy is Shaft in Africa, where he has to go basically like break up it's like a human trafficking kind of ring that he's trying to break up.
It's got a song by the Four Tops in it.
Yeah, so the second film, Isaac Hayes did not return to do the music. So I mentioned that Gordon Parks was a musician and a composer. Gordon Parks did the music as well as directed the second film. And the screenplay was done by Ernest Tidyman, who did the screenplay for the first Shaft. And then the third film, Gordon Parks didn't direct it, and he didn't do the music, but the song in there is by the Four Tops, right? Are You Man Enough?
Yeah. Are
You Man Enough? Big and Bad Enough.
And composed and arranged by Johnny Pat, P-A-T-E.
Johnny Pat, not Johnny Pants.
Patty.
All right, so there were plenty of blaxploitation films throughout the 1970s, like The Mac. Like, I'm just showing off my record collection here. Willie Dynamite.
Willie Dynamite. This is cool.
Foxy Brown and Coffee, Dolomite, which is a pretty terrible film, but it's hilarious to watch. Cleopatra Jones, Trouble Man, which features Marvin Gaye soundtrack, Black Caesar, and then blaxploitation movies even had horror films like Blackula, Blackenstein, Dr. Black, Mr. Hyde, as well as TV shows like I just mentioned a second ago, Get Christy Love, which has Charles Ciaffi, who plays Vic Andrazi in Shaft. But blaxploitation made stars out of people like Pam Grier, Tamara Dobson, who was in both Cleopatra Jones films. Fred Williamson, who was an ex-football player that became a movie star throughout the 1970s and is still acting today. As a matter of fact, I'll mention a movie that he's in what we've been watching. Bernie Casey, also another ex-football star who's in a lot of movies, and Jim Brown. Everybody knows Jim Brown, ex-football star who became an actor and acted in a lot of these films in the 1970s.
Watched a movie that was about Jim Brown, or about it had Jim Brown in it.
Yeah, it had a character playing Jim Brown in it,
right?
Yeah, The Express, right. And then blaxploitation movies were parodied in I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, which has Isaac Hayes. Isaac Hayes also did blaxploitation movies in the 1970s, like Tough Guys. So that's the last record, I swear. Truck Turner, and then Isaac Hayes also went on to do things like Escape from New York. Is it like a pinball machine or something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that has the song Hung Up on My Baby, which forms the principal sample for Mind Playing Tricks on Me by Ghetto Boys.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So blaxploitation, as I was saying, was parodied by movies like I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, Pootie Tang, which I think I mentioned a long time ago on the show, and Black Dynamite. The original Shaft trilogy is on HBO Max. It's followed by the 2 sequels that we mentioned, then 7 TV films in 1973 and 1974. 7 different TV films. They all have Richard Roundtree, and they are available on DVD. And then, as we mentioned, you have like the sequel / reboot in 2000 with Samuel L. Jackson, and the sequel to that movie, which came out in 2019, which has Richard Roundtree, Samuel L. Jackson. I don't remember who plays the grandson, but there's Shaft the third, Shaft Senior and Shaft Junior, all in that film. This movie's 88% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, 68% audience score. Siskel and Ebert, not very high on this film. Siskel gave it 2 stars. Ebert gave it 2.5 stars. And this is before they had their own show. This came out before then, but that comes from their print reviews. Leonard Maltin gives it 3 stars out of 4. He actually gives all the original Shaft films and the Shaft 2000 film all 3 stars. And I didn't see what he gave Shaft 2019 because I didn't really care. So anyway, that's everything you want to know and more about Shaft and blaxploitation, at least the 10,000 foot view. Okay. I think I definitely didn't cover everything, but that's a good overview. I hope it's a good overview.
Anyways.
All right.
That's it. So you kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. What have you been watching besides Shaft? We always like to follow up our Monday's episodes with that. So
yes, I mentioned Fred Williamson because I watched VFW, which is kind of a Assault on Precinct 13-esque sort of film, which came out, I think maybe a couple of years ago, something like that. I feel like I'm late to the party, but it's got Stephen Lang, who's recently been in those Don't Breathe movies, Don't Breathe 1 and 2. Avatar. And it's got William Sadler, who played Death in Bill and Ted, the Bill and Ted movies. And it's got Fred Williamson, as I mentioned. It's even got George Wendt, Norm from Cheers, and Martin Kove, who's currently in Cobra Kai. But I thought VFW was good. I thought it was a fun. It's a fun, turn your brain off and enjoy movie. It gets going pretty quickly. Basically, the girl runs into the bar where they're at. She's being chased by a bunch of loonies who want these drugs back that she stole, and it's just a siege on the bar for the rest of the movie for the most part. It's pretty exciting. It's good. Again, it's not going to win any awards, but I thought it was a really fun movie. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And it has a cool kind of throwback soundtrack, like a synthy kind of soundtrack like that. But yeah, I thought it was good. Other than that, I watched some horror movies. I watched The New Grudge, which was bad.
2020 Grudge?
Yeah, 2020 Grudge. It was not good.
Not good at all.
It's
nothing like the one we reviewed.
No, because I really liked that one. This movie, I think the biggest problem with this movie, it's not that it's just god awful. It's okay. It's competently made, I would say, but it does absolutely nothing new. Like I feel like it basically just regurgitates scenes from the other movies. So it doesn't do anything new at all. So I just was kind of bored with it.
Was it the same people behind it, like that writer director? Or do you know?
No, I can't remember the guy's name, but this is the guy that wrote and directed The Eyes of My Mother, which is a indie kind of horror film, which honestly I didn't like, but that movie gets a lot of praise and love. So they tapped him to do this. And again, it's competently made, but it didn't really go anywhere for me. I feel like it's just a rehash of the other ones, and inferior rehash at that. I did not mention this in a previous episode, but a few weeks ago, I actually watched The Night House with Rebecca Hall, which is kind of a newer horror-ish movie, which I thought was pretty good overall. I was a little bit let down at the end, but I think her performance is really good. But I watched another Rebecca Hall movie that came out, I think, in 2011. It's a 1920s ghost story that takes place in England called The Awakening, and I actually thought this was really good. I don't know that it was better than The Night House, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a cool little, again, kind of ghost story. You know, it has a few twists and turns that you might see coming, you might not see coming, but I thought overall it was pretty good. And then the final horror film that I want to mention, I actually didn't write it down, is a movie that I have been meaning to watch for a long time. It came out, I think, now in 2014, so now basically 8 years ago. No, it's 2022. Have to remember that. I think it came out in 2014, but I heard about it back then. I've been meaning to watch it over the years. I just never have gotten around to it. And I was looking through the horror subreddit on Reddit. And yeah, I was like, on what? Oh yeah, on Reddit. And somebody mentioned that they had just watched this movie. And I was like, oh, you know what? I still need to watch it. So I looked to see if it was streaming. It's streaming on Hulu. And it is a movie by, what's their name? Moorhead and Benson is their last names. They made The Endless, which we watched.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they recently made Synchronic, which has like Anthony Mackie, I think.
I bought it, but I haven't watched it yet.
Well, I know it's on Netflix. I feel like I need to watch it. But this is a movie that they did before The Endless called Spring. Have you heard of this movie?
I might have, because I remember I don't remember why we started watching The Endless, why I was big about getting it. But I think around the time we watched The Endless, I knew about the other movies, but currently now it doesn't ring a bell.
So I thought The Endless was pretty good, especially for kind of a lower budget, kind of indie sci-fi film. I thought Spring was fantastic. This is one of the best films I've seen, I feel like, in years. Like, I really, really loved this film. This is a film that I watched it, and I probably could have started over and just watched it again. Oh, wow. Like, I was so impressed by this film. I mean, it's already like in probably my top 50 films, if not top 25 films of all time. That's awesome. I think it's a fantastic film. It's one of those movies that I want to tell everybody I know to watch it, but that never ends well for me. I tell everybody, like, oh, you got to watch Boogie Nights or whatever, and they all hate it. Or Kicking and Screaming or something like that. They all hate it. But I want to tell everybody I know to watch this movie. But I know some people will like it, and I definitely know some people won't like it. But I loved it. I thought Spring was just amazing. And it's definitely a film that I will revisit, I'm sure, many times. I loved it.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right, so what have you been watching?
So you talked about one of the best movies you've ever seen, and I'm going to talk about one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Okay.
It came out a couple weeks ago, I think, on Disney+. It was the only Marvel movie that I have not seen yet, and that's The Eternals.
Which I haven't seen.
Yeah, Chloe Zhao's The Eternals. You know, she did No Man Land, and then she did The Eternals. I mean, I think there's not anything new I bring to this conversation. It's just, at the end of the day, it's really long, and I don't really care about the characters and all that kind of stuff, so it's not really interesting. And I think I think some of the visuals are interesting, but I think at the end of the day, the biggest crime in the movie is that I didn't care about the people, and I had to really force myself to pay attention to the movie and not focus or not let my attention drift to something else. Like it couldn't even, like I'm in the can for Marvel movies, and it couldn't even hold my attention the whole length of the movie. Yeah, like I just kept on wandering, and I'm like, oh wait, I'm watching something.
There's something on screen.
It was literally like that. It was weird. So okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not the. It wasn't for me. I'm not gonna say it was like a bad movie or whatnot. It wasn't what I was looking for, and it wasn't for me.
Well, as you know, I'm exhausted by all the superhero stuff.
You might like this.
You know me. I'm not. It'll probably be a while before I get around to watching.
This is like the anti-life equation.
I know everybody makes a big deal about how it's the first like MCU movie to be rotten on Rotten Tomatoes or whatever. So apparently you agree with that. Yeah. You're like, yeah, that's fine. That's fine with me.
Yeah, and I think she was trying for something different, and I think the studio's trying for something different, and I don't know. Based on those merits, if it's good or not, it wasn't my thing. I'm still grappling with it. Excuse me. In addition to that, I watched Sidney Poitier. Unfortunately, passed away.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, and he was a powerhouse of an actor. And there's a bunch of stuff I haven't seen of his that I need to see that we'll probably do here soon.
Sure.
But one of the movies I kind of remember him fondly from my childhood and I wanted to watch again was Sneakers with Robert Redford and Sidney Poitier and Dan Aykroyd and River Phoenix and all that kind of stuff. And it's a competently competently made hacking movie. Actually, it's actually a pretty kind of accurate kind of portrayal into hacking, a little bit with like the social engineering and stuff like that. And I like hacking movies, so it's near and dear to my heart. And it was just good to kind of see him on screen again and all that kind of stuff. And I like Sneakers a lot. I think it's a good movie. Robert Redford just kind of shines in it. And, unfortunately, like Sidney Poitier doesn't really have a huge role in it, but he's good and a powerhouse when he needs to be in the few scenes that it requires him and all that kind of stuff. But, just wanted to watch something that I'm fond of that had him in it. So I watched Sneakers again.
I need to watch that again. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I remember liking it back when I did see it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like elevating or surprising or anything like that. I just think it's like a capable, well done film. It's fun to watch. Has Stephen Tobolowsky in it, which is always fun to see him. He's like one of that guys, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, that's what I've been watching.
What's funny because Sidney Poitier, he was in a lot of movies, in the 50s and the 60s, 70s, and then he didn't retire, but he basically became very choosy about roles that he would take. And I remember his movie roles were few and far between, and it's not that he couldn't get work. I think he just was very selective. Yeah. He was the opposite of Nick Cage or Bruce Willis, right?
Sam Jackson.
He could take
Danny Trejo.
Whatever exactly. He could take whatever he wanted and leave whatever he wanted. So I would always pay attention when I heard that Sidney Poitier was in a movie, and so I remember when Sneakers came out, and 92. I was like, wow, Sidney Poitier did another movie, because I don't know when the last movie he had done prior to that, but it was one of those things. Every time he would do a movie, and I don't even remember what the last movie that he did was. Like I don't even know if he did anything. He probably did in the 2010s or whatever. But I think he'd been taking it easy, for a long time before. And his daughter is an actress. His daughter's also named Sydney, but Sydney with a Y instead of an I.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I saw her in was Death Proof, the Grindhouse thing. I know she's been in stuff since then, but I think that's the last thing I saw her in. Yeah, she's very beautiful.
All right.
Just throw that out. She's a gorgeous girl.
Just in case you're watching.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's everything we've been watching. Anything else?
Nope.
All right.
Just Sidney Poitier's daughter is really hot.
There you go. Speaking of that, what did you pair us to watch with Shaft on Wednesday?
Yeah, so I mentioned Sweetback's Badass Song and Shaft were early progenitors of the blaxploitation genre, and Shaft made money for MGM Studios. It was profitable for the studio. Other studios saw that and they were like, hey, we want to do that too. So Warner Brothers, I believe, was the distributor of the film that we're going to talk about Wednesday. It's got Ron O'Neal as Youngblood Priest, who's always got the Superfly shit. It's Superfly.
There you go. All right, well, stay tuned Wednesday when we watch Superfly. I don't know what I say at these things. Please like, subscribe, share, do all that social media stuff with the episode. It really does help spread the word. Please send us your viewer questions. We're realshame@gmail.com. Leave a comment down below if you've seen Shaft and you think he's a super fly guy. I guess that doesn't really work with Shaft. If
is he hotter than Bond and cooler than Bullitt, or is he not?
So if you're watching us on YouTube, leave a comment below or shoot us an email. Let us know where you fall on Shaft, and stay tuned Wednesday when we find out how Superfly is. We'll see you soon, guys. Bye.